Hey, Luke here with CatsandCarp.com, and this video is about me trying to learn how to create my own fish hooks from hand and how to catch fish using primitive fishing techniques. And you can see here I've got a cow bone, and I got this like it's a chew toy, something you buy for your dog, but it's a chunk of cow bone. Taking a hammer, busting off a shard, and I'm trying to make what's called a fish gouge. It's basically a spiky length of bone or wood that's pointed on both sides that gets stuck in a fish's mouth or stuck in its throat. So this is like that chicken bone that you choke to death on in the restaurant on steroids. This is what we're trying to make. And you kind of take the hammer and bust out a rough shape, and then I take this cinder block or any rough stone and just rub it and rub it and rub it until it gets to the shape you want. And then you can balance it on your finger to kind of make sure it's symmetrical and that's evenly balanced. That's really important. You want it to be nice and symmetrical. And then once that happens, I went and ground it on the corner to make these little grooves in the middle for the string. And the string is just leftover Power Pro, 80-pound Power Pro I have from a reel that I unspooled. I had it hanging out in the garage, and I wrap it around a water bottle. And this is a great little way to store your line. And I've got a little inline lead, but you can tie on a bolt or a rock or anything heavy to use as a weight. And then I put this little chunk of twig on there, and the twig's just so the lead doesn't go all the way to the gouge. Next, I took a little piece of bamboo I found and split it open to make a smaller fish gouge to catch small bait fish. So I've got the bigger gouge for catching catfish and the little gouge for catching bluegill. And my goal here is I really want to catch a catfish on a fish gouge. Well, I want to catch anything on a fish gouge, frankly. I've never done this before. You're watching me do this for the first time. So I take this little chunk of bamboo and whittle it down, and I'm trying to make it as sharp as possible. And bamboo or any other hardwood works good, but you want a very sharp, very small, very thin and piece of wood for this fish gouge. It's got to slide down a bluegill's throat really easy. So once I got that all done, I just went out and I decided I'm going to get my own bait. So dug up bait with my bare hands and chopped up little pieces of worm, and you just want it to barely cover the gouge. You want it to be bite-sized, like a donut hole, where it just slides down the throat so easy. And I shove this into the middle of the worm, and you want it to be covered up as much as you can with worm. But be warned, you will lose a lot of bait doing this. A lot of bait.
Oh, success!
All right, I did it. Got a little green sunfish, which have much larger mouths than normal bluegill. So I think that's probably tells me something about the size of my gouge. So smaller is better, unless you're going for fish with bigger mouths. So I lost a load of bait. I probably had 20 times had to rebait my hook until I finally hooked one. But now that he's hooked, he's really on there good. He is not coming off. But he's totally gut hooked. You can see it's completely in his belly. So I think really the key is to completely cover the gouge in food. Make sure so it slides down their throat without them ever feeling any sharp points or anything like that, and then giving it a lot of slack. So all the things you're not supposed to do when you're using a modern hook, do it with a fish gouge. I'm going to see if I can't get my fish gouge back. I think it's going to be a trick. That is all the way deep down in there. That is not coming out. In the end, the only way I could get my fish gouge out was to literally cut the line off and pull it all the way through the fish's mouth. I couldn't get it out. But now I wanted to use this fish to go catch a catfish. So I took my bone gouge and shoved it in here, just kind of like the worm I shoved it in the little hole in the stomach and out the mouth and out the back end, and I want it so it was just barely longer. The gouge was just barely longer than the bait. So I took this little green sunfish, put him on my cowbone gouge, chucked him out there, tied the bottle to the tree, and let it sit while I worked on my bait catching techniques and try to perfect it a little bit. Okay, so I caught one off the dock, but let's see if I can catch one from shore. I'm gonna basically make a little cane pole here with my fish gouge, and there's nothing really fancy to it. You just want a flexible long stick, but the thing is sometimes your stick can break, right? Especially if you catch a big fish and you don't want to lose your fish gouge. So the only trick to this that you need to think about is, instead of tying the string onto the tip, tie it onto the handle and then wrap it the length of the stick all the way to the tip, then tie another knot on the tip. That way, if your cane pole breaks in two, you still got a hold of the handle, then you can hand line the fish in. You won't lose your fish gouge, you won't lose your fish. Let's go get another fish. I ended up rebaiting about 20 times in order to catch my first fish. With my second fish, I managed to catch it after rebaiting about 10 or 12 times. So I was getting a little bit better, and getting a little bit better at baiting the hook and better at catching the fish. Hey, look at that, a little bluegill. Man, when these things work, they work. This is not coming off. Man, I thought the fish would spit the hook really easy. No, with these fish gouges, you either got them or you don't. And when you got them, you got to cut the fish up to get them out. This thing's on there for good. So there's no catch and release fishing with fish gouges. At any rate, I'm gonna go check my catfish gouge and see if we got anything on there, just to check my bait, and see if we can't get something bigger. We're gonna climb this food chain. Well, something definitely bit it. My line was, I casted it out there and it was way off to the left and under a snag. But one of the nice things about this is, because there's no hook, you can drag it right through the weeds and it doesn't snag on anything. This is pretty snag resistant. But anyway, we're gonna go put a new fish on this and see if we can't get ourselves a catfish. After losing so many worms to catch a bluegill, I wasn't surprised that I lost my bluegill when trying to catch a catfish. So I rebaited up, chucked it out there, and gave it another go. And while I was doing that, I went out to go catch some more bait. And I got a little bit better at it. You really got to watch the line and let the fish take it, and let it take it for several seconds in order for it to swallow that bait. And that was really important. But once again, catfish stole my bluegill. Oh, I went and caught a new one, rebaited up, and I was out there trying it again. And I ended up doing that a lot. There you go, not a bad little bluegill on the fish gouge. This thing will make some really good bait. By the end of the first day, I got it down where I could usually catch a fish after rebaiting only 3 to 5 times. Getting good at this now. Additionally, I figured out a trick for getting the gouge out without having to cut the line. You take a small stick and push the gouge down into the throat to get it line up with the fish's throat, and then you can pull it out. Sometimes it takes a few tries, but usually it worked. And it was a lot easier than having to cut the line. But while I was getting much better at catching bluegill, I was still having no luck with the catfish. I was losing loads of bait. I was usually getting a bite every hour or two, and I could see my line being dragged, 30, 40 yards in different directions. So I know the fish were taking it, committing, and swimming off with the bait. But they just end up stripping the hook and nothing. So I worked on my baiting techniques. I figured if I just baited it differently, it would help. So I tried a couple things. First, I tried cutting off the spines on the bluegill, so I thought maybe catfish would more likely to swallow it if it didn't have spines. And then I would shove the gouge in the anus and out the one side, then push it back in out the other side. And this seemed to be a lot sturdier, so it'd be harder for the catfish to rip the bait off the gouge. So I thought hopefully this would help. It certainly looked good. There was just barely a point on either end, so something to catch in the fish's throat. And I got out there and chucked it out for the umpteenth time and let it sit. And while I waited for a catfish to bite, I sat there and caught some more bluegill. I got really good at this. I'm actually really pleased with myself. After spending several days doing this, I really feel like I could go out in the woods with some string and a pocket knife and catch a load of bluegill and be good at it. But one problem with my bottle technique, you see here, is if you squeeze the bottle too much, the air comes out of it, the bottle starts to crinkle, and then when you cast, the line snags on the bottle and rips it out of your hand, and then you end up having to go waiting for your bottle. So you want to keep your bottle inflated and tight, maybe even fill it up with water to keep it from collapsing as you wrap it in string, and that'll make it work much better for casting. I also got better and better with practice at being able to bait my gouge properly and being able to catch the fish. But no dice on the catfish. I kept getting bites. Like you can see here, the line's tight. Something's dragged it out there, but there's nothing on. Well, I tried my fish gouge, and I had 3 fish on, and I lost them all. And I just think it's too big. I've learned a lot from using the fishing gouge on the bluegill, and small and thin are a big deal. So I really feel like this is just too bulky. So I want to make one that's about 1/2 to 3/4 this size, and I'm making it a lot thinner and see if we can't catch a catfish on this. Making one of these gouges took me about an hour for each gouge, but I got better at it. A couple things that really helped was using my knife instead of the nail. Like using the knife to kind of direct the hammer's force really allowed me to rough out the gouge a lot better and have to do a lot less grinding. May not be great for my knife, but worked pretty good. And you can see here, I went out and was really trying to make a thinner, smaller gouge. And I definitely reduced the weight on it, reduced the profile on it a bunch, and it was about 3/4 of the length of the original gouge. And once again, put the little notch in the center using the corner of the center block, and you can see there. Doesn't have to be a pronounced notch in the middle, just enough to make it a thin point. But this one worked nice because it was smaller. It fit inside the bottle, so it was a lot easier to store it. I could just put the cap on, and then it would keep it from getting all tangled up when I was not using it. At any rate, went out and caught some more bluegill with worms I dug out of the ground, and baited them up and had a much smaller piece of meat, which I hoped would slide down the fish's throat a little bit easier. And on the head piece, I would shove it in the gill out the mouth, then pull it all the way through, then shove it down the stomach, and you'd have 2 points on either side and a really solid bait set. And I was really satisfied that this was about as strong as you could get to prevent the fish from being able to rip the bait off the gouge. So it looked good, and I got out and threw a ton of bait in the water and got pretty good at throwing that bottle too. And about an hour to 2 hours, I'd come back, and you could see that the bottle had been moved. I mean, that the line had been pulled all over the place, that there'd been a fish on, but then nothing. And I was pretty convinced from those bluegill that if that catfish had have swallowed that fish gouge, he would still be on there. They just don't come off that easy.
Well, this primitive fishing video is really getting under my skin. I have been working on this thing for 5-6 days now. I've been out fishing 4 days with the primitive fish gorge, and I've had 8 or 9 catfish on, and I've gone through tons of bait, and I have yet to land or even really hook well a catfish. Now, I've been using set lines and limb lines, so part of me wonders if the fish is just spitting the hook. You know, if I was holding on to the line, maybe I could get him in before he got off, but somehow I don't think that's the case. I also recently just took a break and did a collaborative video with Mike from One Rod and One Reel Fishing, and while I was doing that, we were catching these different sized fish, and I was looking at the size of their throats. Part of me is wondering if I'm not using the right size, if I need to go even smaller. So I think today I'm going to try going even smaller. The other thing I've noticed is I tend to not gut hook channel catfish nearly as much as I do flatheads. I gut hook flatheads all the time. So part of me wonders if it's a species thing, that I need to go to an area that targets flatheads to have a chance for this fish gorge to work, because I need to gut hook them for it to work. So we'll see what happens.
So back to the drawing board, another hour carving out a gouge. This one's smaller and thinner than before. This was my 4th gouge that I made out of bone. And so I was getting pretty good at it and getting a little bit faster too. But I'm gonna go try this new gouge out and see if it doesn't work. And I'm also gonna try watching it. So instead of just setting the line and walking away for a couple hours, I'm gonna stay close by and keep an eye on it and see if that doesn't help. And my boy Nathan here is gonna help me out. Well, I wish I could say this video had a happy ending and I caught a catfish, but I didn't. I ended up catching about 20 bluegill, hooking a dozen or more catfish, and in the end somebody stole my fishing gouges while they were tied to this tree, and I just called it. I'd spent a week working on this project and many hours, and in the end I would have been better off eating my bluegill than trying to catch a stupid catfish. And so it just didn't make a lot of sense. I might be trying this again in the next summer, but hopefully you liked it and you learned something from this. And if you'd like to check out some of our other videos, check out fishing with bamboo poles and how to catch bluegill with mashed potatoes. And if you like what you see, don't forget to click subscribe.